The coat hanger that Corporal Eddie Kovacs pulled from the rubble of a Belgian farmhouse outside Bastogne on December 19, 1944, was the cheap wire kind that cost maybe 12 cents in a Chicago department store, bent and rusted from years hanging in a closet that no longer had walls. Kovacs stuffed it in his field jacket without thinking much about it, the same way soldiers collected anything that might be useful when you were surrounded by 3 German panzer divisions and winter was trying to kill you as aggressively as the enemy. 3 days later, at 0620 hours on December 22nd, that coat hanger would be the only thing standing between 340 American soldiers and 11 German Tiger tanks advancing through morning fog toward defensive positions that couldn't stop them. The temperature was 8 degrees Fahrenheit. The M1A1 bazooka that Private Tommy Fletcher was trying to fire at a Tiger tank 60 yards away had just clicked empty for the 3rd time, the electrical firing pin corroded by moisture and cold into uselessness, and the 56-ton German tank was rotating its 80 mm gun toward the foxhole, where Fletcher and Kovacs were about to die. Kovacs had been a brakeman for the Chicago and Northwestern Railway for 6 years before the draft found him in January 1943, and those 6 years had taught him everything about electrical systems that failed in cold weather. Railway signal boxes in Chicago winters operated at temperatures down to -20 Fahrenheit, and when they failed, it was always the same problem: moisture getting into electrical connections, freezing, expanding, breaking the circuit. The bazooka's electrical firing system was failing for exactly the same reason, and Kovacs understood this in the 3 seconds between Fletcher's 3rd misfire and the moment when the Tiger's turret would complete its traverse and fire an 80 mm round that would vaporize their position. He grabbed the bazooka from Fletcher, yanked the bent coat hanger from his jacket, and jammed the wire into the firing mechanism in a bypass configuration he'd used 100 times to hotwire frozen signal boxes on the Northwestern line. The circuit completed, the rocket motor ignited. The 2.36-inch shaped charged projectile left the tube at 265 feet per second and covered 60 yards in 0.68 seconds, hitting the Tiger's side armor at the junction between hull and turret, where German welding quality was poorest. The Tiger stopped moving. Black smoke poured from the engine compartment. The turret remained frozen mid-traverse, gun pointing uselessly at empty air, 15 degrees left of the American position. Kovacs and Fletcher were already moving, scrambling out of their foxhole toward the next position, where another bazooka team was about to discover that their weapon wouldn't fire either. The German assault on Bastogne's eastern perimeter had begun 12 minutes earlier with an artillery barrage that was still ongoing. 105mm and 150mm shells landing in random patterns across American defensive positions that were already undermanned and critically low on ammunition. Intelligence estimates suggested 2 German panzer divisions were committed to the assault: the 2nd Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr, approximately 180 tanks total with supporting infantry. The 101st Airborne Division defending Bastogne had exactly 40 operational Sherman tanks, most with frozen track assemblies and less than 20 rounds of 75mm ammunition each. The bazookas were supposed to be the equalizer, portable anti-tank weapons that could stop German armor at close range, except they weren't firing. Kovacs had noticed the problem 2 days earlier during a skirmish with German reconnaissance units. 3 separate bazooka teams had reported misfires, their weapons clicking uselessly while German tanks maneuvered with impunity. The Ordnance Department blamed defective rockets, but Kovacs had pulled the firing mechanism from one failed bazooka and seen the problem immediately: corrosion on the electrical contacts where the firing pin circuit connected to the rocket motor. The moisture came from soldiers' breath condensing inside the tubes during cold weather operations, then freezing and expanding to break the electrical connection. Standard Army procedure was to return defective weapons to ordnance depots for repair, but Bastogne was surrounded, and there were no ordnance depots within 50 miles of German-controlled territory. Kovacs had mentioned the problem to his platoon sergeant, who had mentioned it to the company commander, who had mentioned it to battalion headquarters, where it disappeared into the category of problems that couldn't be solved, so weren't worth discussing. The 2nd Tiger tank appeared through morning fog at 0634 hours, its commander confident enough in German armor superiority that he was advancing with hatches open and turret crew exposed. Kovacs reached the next bazooka position where Corporal Martinez and Private Johnson were frantically trying to fire a weapon that clicked empty with the same corroded connection failure. Kovacs took the bazooka, inserted his coat hanger bypass, and fired from 80 yards. The rocket hit the Tiger's track assembly, severing the right track and immobilizing the tank on terrain that provided no room to maneuver. The German commander dropped into his turret and sealed the hatches, but the Tiger was finished as a combat asset, blocking the path for tanks behind it and creating a bottleneck in the German assault formation. 2 tanks immobilized in 14 minutes with a 12-cent coat hanger and knowledge that came from fixing frozen railway signals in Chicago winters. The German assault was supposed to break through American lines in 30 minutes. Kovacs was buying time measured in seconds, but seconds were the currency that determined whether 340 American soldiers lived or died. The problem with the coat hanger bypass was that it required manual installation for every shot, approximately 15 seconds of work that exposed the operator to enemy fire while fumbling with wire and electrical contacts. Standard bazooka doctrine called for 2-man teams, 1 to aim and fire, 1 to load rockets. Kovacs was now requiring a third step: wire the bypass, then fire, then remove the bypass before loading the next rocket. The process should have been impossible under combat conditions, but Kovacs had spent 6 years working on railway equipment in conditions where impossible meant trains didn't run and cargo didn't move. He taught Martinez the bypass technique in 45 seconds, while German machine gun fire kicked up frozen dirt around their position. Martinez was a mechanic from Detroit who understood electrical systems the same way Kovacs did, and his hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd hot-wired enough cars to recognize a simple circuit bypass when he saw one. The third Tiger appeared at 0641 hours, advancing through the gap where the first immobilized Tiger had created congestion in the German formation. This one had learned from the previous casualties and was advancing with infantry support, German soldiers in winter camouflage moving alongside the tank to protect it from close-range bazooka fire. Kovacs and Martinez had to wait for the tank to clear its infantry screen, 80 yards becoming 70, then 60, then 50, before they had a clean shot at the Tiger's frontal armor. The M1A1 bazooka's shaped charge warhead was designed to penetrate 4 inches of armor plate at optimal angle, but the Tiger's frontal armor was 4 inches thick and angled at 80 degrees, which effectively increased its protection to approximately 6 inches. The shot would only work if it hit the lower glacis plate, where armor was thinner and angles were less severe. Martinez aimed low. Kovacs confirmed the bypass was properly connected, and the rocket fired at 48 yards with a backblast that revealed their position to every German soldier within 200 yards. The Tiger's lower glacis plate buckled under the shaped charge's penetration, but the tank didn't stop immediately. It continued forward for another 12 yards before its engine seized from oil loss and internal fire, rolling to a stop 36 yards from the American position, with its gun still traversing toward targets it would never fire at. German infantry that had been using the Tiger for cover were suddenly exposed in open ground with no supporting armor, and American rifle fire from adjacent positions cut through them in seconds. 15 Germans fell within 20 yards of the disabled Tiger. The survivors retreated into fog, dragging wounded with them, and the German assault momentum that had been building for 21 minutes suddenly broke against the reality that their supposedly invincible Tigers were being destroyed by American soldiers with weapons that shouldn't have been working. Kovacs and Martinez were already moving again, heading toward the next bazooka position where Private Williams was screaming for help with a weapon that clicked empty while a Tiger tank closed to 40 yards. The realization that swept through American defensive positions between 0645 and 0700 hours was almost religious in its intensity. The bazookas could work. Someone had figured out how to make them work, and that someone was a railway brakeman from Chicago who was running from position to position with a bent coat hanger and knowledge that came from 6 years of fixing frozen railway signals. Williams watched Kovacs install the bypass in 12 seconds, fired at 35 yards, and hit the Tiger's turret ring where armor was thinnest. The tank stopped with its turret jammed at 45 degrees, unable to traverse or elevate its main gun. 4 Tigers destroyed or immobilized in 40 minutes. The German assault that was supposed to break through Bastogne's eastern perimeter in 30 minutes was now stalled behind burning and disabled tanks that blocked narrow roads through frozen Belgian countryside. But the Germans had committed 11 Tigers to this assault, and 7 were still advancing through gaps in the American defensive line where bazooka teams didn't have Kovac's bypass modification. At 07:03 hours, a Tiger broke through the southern sector where Sergeant Davidson's platoon had exhausted their bazooka ammunition after 3 consecutive misfires. The tank was advancing unopposed toward American artillery positions 400 yards behind the front line, positions that contained the 105mm howitzers that were the only weapons capable of stopping German armor at range. If the Tiger reached those guns, it would destroy them systematically, and the entire Bastogne defense would collapse. Kovacs was 300 yards north with no direct path to Davidson's sector, and even if he could reach it, he had 1 coat hanger bypass and approximately 40 seconds before the Tiger completed its breakthrough. The next 8 hours would determine whether Kovac's improvised solution could be taught to enough bazooka teams, fast enough to stop 11 German Tigers with supporting infantry and artillery, or whether the German assault would achieve the breakthrough that military planners in Berlin believed was inevitable. The coat hanger in Kovac's jacket pocket was bent, rusted, and worth approximately 12 cents. The lives of 340 American soldiers surrounded at Bastogne were about to depend on whether wire that came from a Belgian farmhouse closet could conduct electricity reliably enough to fire rockets at German tanks that cost 800,000 Reichsmarks each. And somewhere in the fog between American and German positions, 7 more Tigers were advancing toward defensive lines that couldn't stop them without the modification that only one railway brakeman from Chicago knew how to install. Kovacs reached Davidson's sector at 07:08 hours by running directly across open ground that was being swept by German machine gun fire, a decision that violated every tactical principle he'd learned in basic training, but was the only option when 7 Tigers were advancing through gaps in American defensive positions. Davidson's bazooka team had exhausted their rockets after 3 misfires, and the Tiger that had broken through was now 320 yards from the artillery positions, advancing at 8 miles per hour through terrain that provided no natural obstacles. Kovacs grabbed the nearest functional bazooka from Private Chen's position, installed his coat hanger bypass, while explaining the procedure in 20 seconds of rapid instruction that Chen absorbed with the focus of someone who understood that comprehension meant survival. They fired from 140 yards at a Tiger moving perpendicular to their position, the rocket hitting the tank's side armor behind the turret where fuel tanks were located. The Tiger didn't explode cinematically like in training films. It simply stopped moving as internal fire consumed its fuel supply, and the crew bailed out through hatches, 5 German tankers running toward their own lines through fog that provided temporary concealment. 5 Tigers destroyed or disabled in 48 minutes. The German assault was now encountering organized resistance from bazooka teams, who were learning Kovac's bypass technique through field instruction that spread position to position faster than official orders could have transmitted it. Between 07:10 and 07:30 hours, Kovacs moved through 6 separate defensive positions, installing bypasses and teaching the 15-second procedure to bazooka operators, who ranged from farm boys who'd never seen electrical wiring to factory workers from Detroit and Pittsburgh who understood circuits intuitively. The technique's simplicity was its strength. Insert the coat hanger wire to bridge the corroded connection, confirm contact by checking for circuit continuity, fire the rocket, remove the bypass before loading the next round. Kovacs had created variations using whatever conductive wire was available: stripped copper from telephone cables, steel wire from ammunition crates, even a straightened safety pin that Corporal Morrison contributed from his first aid kit. The 6th Tiger fell at 07:34 hours to a shot fired by Martinez, who had absorbed Kovac's instructions so completely that he was now teaching the bypass technique to other bazooka teams while Kovacs moved to the next crisis point. Martinez's rocket hit the Tiger at 95 yards, penetrating the engine compartment and causing a fuel fire that forced the crew to abandon the vehicle. The Tiger sat burning in the middle of the road it had been advancing down, blocking passage for German infantry who were supposed to be following armor breakthrough. American rifle fire caught the infantry exposed in open ground. 23 Germans fell in less than a minute. The survivors retreated into fog, and the German assault that had begun 72 minutes earlier with confident expectations of breakthrough was now fragmenting into isolated engagements where American defenders were destroying tanks at ranges that shouldn't have been survivable for bazooka operators. The 7th Tiger appeared at ARSO 741 hours in the northern sector, where Lieutenant Hayes commanded 2 understrength platoons that had been holding position since the siege began 4 days earlier. This Tiger had learned from previous casualties and was advancing with maximum caution, using terrain features for cover and coordinating movements with supporting infantry. Hayes had 3 bazooka teams in his sector, but only one had received instruction on Kovacs's bypass technique. That team, led by Sergeant Foster from Kansas City, waited until the Tiger committed to crossing open ground between 2 farmhouses before firing from 52 yards. The rocket hit the Tiger's track assembly on the left side, severing the track and causing the tank to pivot uncontrollably. The Tiger's commander attempted to compensate by applying differential braking, but the frozen ground provided insufficient traction, and the tank slewed sideways into a drainage ditch where it became completely immobilized. 7 Tigers destroyed or disabled in 81 minutes by American forces who weren't supposed to have functioning anti-tank weapons. Between ARSO 745 and ARSO 900 hours, the German assault entered what their after-action reports would later describe as unexpected resistance from American close-range anti-tank capabilities. This was military language for the discovery that their Tiger tanks, which cost 800,000 Reichsmarks each and represented Germany's most advanced armored technology, were being systematically destroyed by American soldiers using improvised electrical bypasses made from coat hangers and scrap wire. German commanders committed the remaining 4 Tigers to a coordinated assault on the southern perimeter, where intelligence suggested American defenses were weakest. The Tigers advanced in diamond formation with heavy infantry support and preparatory artillery bombardment that lasted 14 minutes and expended approximately 600 shells of various calibers. American casualties during this bombardment were 31 killed and 47 wounded, but the defensive positions held because the soldiers manning them knew that functioning bazookas were now available to stop the armor assault that would follow the artillery. The 8th Tiger broke through the initial defensive line at 0908 hours, overwhelming a position held by Private Jackson's squad through combination of accurate main gunfire and supporting machine guns that suppressed American rifle fire. Jackson's bazooka team had received bypass instruction, but their operator, Private Ellis from Tennessee, had been killed by artillery during the preparatory bombardment. Jackson grabbed the bazooka himself, installed the bypass using the technique Kovacs had demonstrated 90 minutes earlier, and fired from 48 yards while the Tiger was advancing directly toward his position. The rocket hit the Tiger's frontal armor at insufficient angle to penetrate, but the impact damaged the tank's periscope system and forced the commander to button up completely. Blind and unable to acquire targets effectively, the Tiger stopped advancing and began firing randomly at suspected American positions, achieving nothing except ammunition expenditure, while Jackson's squad relocated and prepared a second shot from better angle. Jackson's second rocket, fired from 65 yards at the Tiger's side armor, penetrated the crew compartment and killed 4 of the 5-man crew. The surviving commander surrendered by climbing from his hatch with hands raised, becoming one of the few German Tiger commanders captured alive during the Battle of the Bulge. The 9th and 10th Tigers fell within 3 minutes of each other between IRDO 923 and ARSO 926 hours, both destroyed by bazooka teams who had learned Kovacs's bypass technique through field instruction that had now reached every defensive position on Bastogne's eastern perimeter. The 9th Tiger was hit at 83 yards by Corporal Williams, the same soldier who had watched Kovacs install the first bypass 141 minutes earlier. Williams' rocket penetrated the Tiger's turret ring and jammed the turret rotation mechanism, rendering the tank's main gun unable to traverse or elevate. The immobilized Tiger attracted concentrated American rifle fire that killed the commander when he attempted to observe through open hatch, and the remaining crew abandoned the vehicle after determining they couldn't rotate the turret to engage targets. The 10th Tiger was destroyed by Sergeant Foster's team at 71 yards, the rocket hitting the tank's ammunition storage compartment and causing a catastrophic explosion that killed the entire crew instantly and scattered Tiger components across 40 yards of frozen Belgian farmland. 10 Tigers destroyed or disabled in 86 minutes. The German assault that was supposed to break through Bastogne's defenses in 30 minutes had now consumed 3 hours and achieved nothing except catastrophic armor losses that German forces couldn't afford given the strategic situation in the Ardennes. The 11th Tiger, commanded by Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, was the last German armor still advancing toward American positions at 09:47 hours. Richter had observed the previous 10 casualties and understood that American forces had developed some new capability that was destroying Tigers at close range. His response was to increase the distance of engagement, stopping his Tiger at 280 yards from American positions and using the 80mm main gun to suppress bazooka teams before they could close to effective range. The tactic was sound by conventional standards, but Richter hadn't anticipated that American bazookas were now being operated by soldiers who understood that close range wasn't a limitation but an advantage when your opponent believed you were harmless beyond 100 yards. Kovacs approached Richter's Tiger from the northern flank, where terrain provided concealment up to approximately 90 yards from the German position. He was accompanied by Martinez and Private Chen, both carrying bazookas with bypass modifications installed and tested. The three-man assault violated every principle of tactical doctrine that emphasized cover and concealment over aggressive maneuver, but Kovacs understood something that formal military training hadn't taught him. The Germans expected American soldiers to behave predictably, and unpredictability was the advantage that mattered when facing superior armor. They closed to 90 yards without being detected, then to 75 yards when Richter's Tiger rotated its turret to engage American positions to the south. At 68 yards, Kovacs signaled for simultaneous fire. 3 rockets launched within 0.4 seconds of each other, converging on Richter's Tiger from angles that made evasion impossible. 2 rockets hit the Tiger's side armor, one penetrating the engine compartment and the other striking the turret base. The third rocket missed high, but created sufficient confusion that Richter's crew couldn't determine the direction of attack. The Tiger's engine seized as internal fire consumed oil and fuel lines. Richter ordered his crew to abandon the vehicle, and 5 German tankers emerged from hatches with hands raised, surrendering to American soldiers who had destroyed 11 Tigers in 207 minutes using improvised electrical bypasses that cost collectively less than $2. The engagement that German commanders had expected would break through Bastogne's defenses had instead resulted in complete failure of their armored assault, with casualty figures that would later be documented as 11 Tigers destroyed, approximately 180 German infantry killed or wounded, and German tactical momentum in the Bastogne sector effectively broken for the next 48 hours. The immediate tactical impact was clear to every American soldier on Bastogne's eastern perimeter by 1,000 hours on December 22nd. The bazookas worked now. The electrical firing systems that had been failing for 4 days were functioning because one railway brakeman from Chicago had understood that moisture corrosion could be bypassed with simple wire connections. But the strategic implications extended far beyond one defensive sector at Bastogne. Between 10:15 and 1200 hours, Kovacs was summoned to battalion headquarters, where Colonel Harper, commanding the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, demanded detailed explanation of the bypass technique that was being reported from every defensive position in the regiment. Kovacs explained the procedure using a training bazooka and 3 different types of wire scavenged from battlefield debris: coat hanger wire, copper telephone cable, and steel ammunition crate binding. The demonstration took 7 minutes. Harper immediately ordered the technique documented and distributed to every unit in the 101st Airborne Division. The documentation process created problems that Kovacs hadn't anticipated. The Ordnance Department wanted formal engineering analysis and testing before approving a field modification that violated manufacturer specifications. The division commander, Major General Anthony McAuliffe, overruled ordnance by pointing out that 11 destroyed German Tigers constituted sufficient field testing for any modification, regardless of whether it violated specifications. McAuliffe's decision was characteristic of the pragmatic approach that had kept the 101st Airborne functional during 4 days of encirclement, but it created bureaucratic resistance that would delay official adoption of Kovacs's bypass technique until January 1945, 6 weeks after it had already saved Bastogne. The formal memorandum approving the modification cited field expedient electrical bypass for M1A1 bazooka firing system failure in extreme cold weather conditions, and recommended immediate procurement and distribution of suitable wire materials for bypass installation by trained personnel. By December 23rd, every bazooka team in the 101st Airborne Division had received instruction in Kovacs's bypass technique, and the modification was spreading to other units through informal communication channels that moved faster than official orders. The 10th Armored Division adopted the technique on December 24th after losing 3 Sherman tanks to Tiger ambush that could have been prevented by functioning bazookas. The 4th Armored Division, which was fighting toward Bastogne from the south, incorporated the bypass into their standard operating procedures on December 26th. By December 31st, approximately 800 American bazooka teams across the European theater had adopted Kovacs's modification, and German armor commanders were reporting unexpectedly high American anti-tank effectiveness at close range in after-action reports that attempted to explain why Tigers were being destroyed in engagements where American forces weren't supposed to have functioning anti-tank weapons. The German response to this development was documented in captured intelligence reports that reached Allied headquarters in January 1945. German armored doctrine had been built on the assumption that American bazookas had limited effectiveness against Tiger armor and were prone to mechanical failure in cold weather. This assumption was now demonstrably false, and German commanders were forced to modify tactics that had been developed over 3 years of Eastern Front combat, where Soviet anti-tank weapons had different characteristics and capabilities. The modification created tactical confusion in German armored units that persisted through January and February 1945, contributing to the overall collapse of German offensive operations in the Ardennes and the subsequent Allied counteroffensive that would reach the Rhine by March. Kovacs's coat hanger bypass hadn't won the Battle of the Bulge by itself, but it had prevented German breakthrough at Bastogne during the critical period when breakthrough would have been strategically decisive. The casualty statistics compiled by 101st Airborne Division headquarters in January 1945 provided quantitative assessment of Kovacs's innovation. The eastern perimeter defensive positions where the December 22nd German armor assault had been stopped reported 43 American killed in action and 127 wounded during the engagement. Intelligence analysis estimated that German breakthrough in that sector would have resulted in loss of the entire defensive position, with projected casualties of 340 killed or captured. The difference between 43 dead and 340 dead was attributable to functioning bazookas that destroyed 11 Tigers before they could penetrate American lines. The cost-benefit analysis was stark enough that even Ordnance Department bureaucrats couldn't dispute it. Approximately $2 worth of scrap wire had saved 297 American lives and prevented loss of defensive positions that were critical to holding Bastogne. Kovacs received the Silver Star on January 15, 1945, during a ceremony at division headquarters that was attended by Major General McAuliffe and approximately 200 soldiers from units that had adopted the bypass technique. The citation credited him with exceptional initiative and technical expertise in developing field expedient modification to anti-tank weapons systems, directly resulting in destruction of 11 enemy armored vehicles and prevention of enemy breakthrough at critical defensive position. The language was bureaucratic and formal, but the soldiers who attended the ceremony understood what it meant. A railway brakeman from Chicago had figured out how to make their weapons work when official channels had failed them, and 297 American soldiers were alive because of it. McAuliffe's remarks were characteristically brief. Corporal Kovacs fixed a problem that the Ordnance Department said couldn't be fixed, using equipment that cost less than a pack of cigarettes. That's American ingenuity at its finest, and that's why we're going to win this war. The technique's adoption across the European theater was documented in training bulletins distributed by European Theater of Operations headquarters in February 1945. The official designation was Field Modification 2345, Electrical Bypass for M1A1 Bazooka Firing System Cold Weather Failure, but soldiers called it the Kovacs Bypass, or simply the coat hanger trick. Training programs were established at replacement depots in England and France, where newly arrived soldiers learned the bypass technique before being sent to frontline units. The training took approximately 30 minutes and required materials that cost less than 50 cents per soldier, 12 inches of copper wire, needle nose pliers, and basic instruction in identifying corroded electrical connections. The training success rate was 94%, meaning that 94 out of every 100 soldiers could successfully install and use the bypass after single training session. The German intelligence assessment of American bazooka effectiveness underwent significant revision between January and March 1945. Captured documents from German 6th Panzer Army headquarters included memorandum dated February 8, 1945, stating, "American close-range anti-tank capabilities have improved significantly since December operations. Previous assumptions regarding bazooka mechanical unreliability no longer apply. German armor forces should assume American infantry possess effective anti-tank weapons at ranges up to 150 meters. The memorandum recommended increased infantry support for armor operations and avoidance of close-range engagements with American defensive positions. These tactical modifications reduced German armor effectiveness during the final months of the war in Europe, contributing to the defensive failures that allowed Allied forces to advance from the Rhine to the Elbe between March and May 1945. Kovacs remained with the 101st Airborne Division through the end of the war in Europe, participating in operations in Alsace, the Rhineland, and Bavaria. He was promoted to sergeant in February 1945 and received 2 additional commendations for technical innovations that improved weapon reliability under field conditions. None of these subsequent innovations achieved the impact of the coat hanger bypass, but they established Kovacs' reputation as the soldier you consulted when equipment failed and official solutions weren't available. His personnel file contained notation from April 1945 stating, "Sergeant Kovacs possesses exceptional mechanical aptitude and should be considered for technical specialist assignment in post-war military organization." The post-war assessment of the coat hanger bypass was conducted by Army Ordnance Department in 1946 as part of comprehensive review of field modifications developed during combat operations. The report acknowledged that Kovacs' bypass had been an effective solution to genuine technical problem, but recommended against official adoption because proper maintenance and cold weather preparation of M1A1 bazooka firing systems should prevent the corrosion issues that necessitated field modifications. This recommendation ignored the reality that soldiers operating in combat conditions couldn't always perform proper maintenance, and that field expedient solutions were necessary when equipment failed, regardless of whose fault the failure was. The recommendation was typical of bureaucratic thinking that valued procedure over results, and it ensured that Kovacs' bypass remained unofficial modification rather than standard procedure. Kovacs was discharged from the Army in October 1945 and returned to Chicago, where he resumed his position as brakeman with the Chicago and Northwestern Railway. His military service was documented in personnel files that contained Silver Star citation and various commendations, but the railway company's employment records made no mention of his wartime innovations. He worked for the Northwestern for another 32 years, retiring in 1977 at age 58 with pension and benefits that reflected length of service but not historical significance of his wartime contribution. Colleagues who worked with Kovacs during the 1950s and 1960s remembered him as quiet, competent, and notably skilled at fixing electrical problems that other brakemen considered beyond repair. None of them knew that he had destroyed 11 German Tiger tanks with a coat hanger and saved 297 American lives during 8 hours at Bastogne. The historical recognition of Kovacs' innovation came gradually and incompletely. The 101st Airborne Division's official history, published in 1948, included 3 paragraphs describing the bazooka bypass technique and crediting Kovacs by name. The Army's official history of the Battle of the Bulge, published in 1965, mentioned the modification in footnote but didn't elaborate on its tactical impact. The most detailed account appeared in 1983 when military historian Dr. Robert Palmer published Field Innovations in the European Theater, 1944-1945, which included a 12-page chapter on Kovacs' bypass and its adoption across American forces. Palmer's research included interviews with 23 veterans who had used the technique, analysis of German intelligence documents, and calculation of lives saved through prevention of German armor breakthrough at Bastogne. Palmer's conclusion was unambiguous. Corporal Kovacs's modification to the M1A1 bazooka firing system represents one of the most cost-effective tactical innovations of World War II. The materials cost was negligible, the training time was minimal, and the impact was measurable in both enemy vehicles destroyed and American casualties prevented. The innovation succeeded because it addressed genuine technical problem that official channels had failed to solve, and because it was simple enough that ordinary soldiers could implement it without specialized training or equipment. This is the essence of effective field innovation, practical solutions to immediate problems, developed by personnel who understand both the equipment and the combat conditions. The physical coat hanger that Kovacs had used for the first bypass modification was lost sometime during the chaotic final months of the war in Europe. It presumably ended up discarded in Belgian countryside or German territory, another piece of wire that nobody recognized as historically significant artifact. The technique it enabled outlived the original implement by decades. Veterans of the 101st Airborne Division taught the bypass modification to their sons who served in Korea and Vietnam, where similar cold weather electrical failures occurred in different weapons systems. The principle remained valid even as technology advanced. When electrical connections fail in cold weather, a simple wire bypass can restore functionality if someone understands the circuit well enough to know where the bypass needs to be installed. Kovacs died in 1994 at age 75, having lived quietly in Chicago for 49 years after the war ended. His obituary in the Chicago Tribune mentioned his military service but didn't elaborate on specific achievements. The funeral was attended by 37 people, including family members, former railway colleagues, and 3 veterans from the 101st Airborne Division who had learned the bypass technique from Kovacs during the war. One of those veterans, Thomas Fletcher, gave brief eulogy that captured the essential truth about Kovacs's contribution. Eddie saved my life and 296 other lives by figuring out how to make our weapons work when they weren't working. He did it with a coat hanger and knowledge he brought from fixing railway signals in Chicago. That's not the kind of thing that gets you in history books, but it's the kind of thing that wins wars. The military legacy of the coat hanger bypass exists primarily in training manuals and doctrinal publications that address field expedient repairs and modifications. The current Army Field Manual FM 322-37, Javelin Close Combat Missile System, includes appendix on cold weather operations that references historical electrical failure modes in previous anti-tank weapons and recommends preventive maintenance procedures. The appendix doesn't mention Kovacs by name, but the procedures it describes are direct descendants of the lessons learned from M1A1 bazooka failures at Bastogne in December 1944. Military organizations learn from experience, even when that learning is slow and the recognition is incomplete. The broader significance of Kovacs's innovation lies not in the specific technical solution, but in what it represents about warfare and problem-solving under pressure. Official military organizations develop doctrine, procedures, and equipment based on comprehensive analysis and extensive testing. This approach produces reliable systems that work under most conditions, but it fails when conditions exceed the parameters that the testing anticipated. Field expedient modifications develop when soldiers encounter problems that official systems can't solve, and those modifications succeed when they're simple enough to be implemented with available materials and knowledge. Kovacs's coat hanger bypass met both criteria. It was simple, and it worked. The fact that it violated manufacturer specifications and Ordnance Department procedures was irrelevant to soldiers who needed functioning weapons to stop German tanks from killing them. The final statistical assessment compiled by military historians in 2004 attempted to quantify the total impact of Kovacs's innovation across the European theater. Between December 1944 and May 1945, approximately 800 American bazooka teams used the bypass modification in combat operations. These teams reported 127 confirmed German armored vehicle kills that were attributed directly to functioning bazookas that would have misfired without the bypass. The analysis acknowledged significant uncertainty in these numbers because many combat engagements were poorly documented, and attribution of specific kills to specific modifications was often impossible. But even the conservative estimates suggested that Kovac's $2 coat hanger modification had contributed to destruction of German armored assets valued at approximately 80 million Reichsmarks and had prevented American casualties that would have numbered in the thousands. The 12-cent coat hanger from a Belgian farmhouse never made it into a museum next to other weapons that changed the course of history. But the principle it represented, that ordinary people with practical knowledge can solve problems that official experts have declared unsolvable, remains relevant to every military organization that must balance bureaucratic procedure against combat necessity. Kovacs understood railway electrical systems, recognized that bazookas failed for the same reasons railway signals failed, and created a solution using materials that cost less than a pack of cigarettes. The 11 German Tiger tanks destroyed on December 22, 1944, and the 297 American soldiers who survived that day would have agreed that this was sufficient qualification for historical recognition, even if the official histories never quite managed to tell the story completely.